Hi, I'm Julia. Welcome back to my booktube channel, NB Library. And this week, I forgot to put my earrings on. This week, we're getting my NetGalley score back up. So, for those of you who don't know, NetGalley is a website where publishers can give reviewers advanced reader copies, so ebook versions of books before they are released to the public, for free in exchange for a fair review. We can get into, whether or not people actually feel like they can review books fully, but that's a topic for another time. I'm gonna try and review the books as fairly as possible. I just got this NetGalley account at the beginning of the year, and because I requested so few books and reviewed so few books, my NetGalley score is quite low right now, and that is the percentage ratio of books that you've been given by a publisher and books that you reviewed. So you want the score to be 100%. Ideally, they recommend 80. Right now, my percentage is at 60, but it was at 40 because I had returned 2 out of 5, I think. I can't do that math quite yet. But I have finished one of the NetGalley arcs that I've been given. There's 2 others that I read in January that you'll see in my January wrap-up. In this video, I'm specifically going to be talking about What We Are Seeking by Cameron Reed, Year of the Myrrh by L.D. Lewis, and The Castle and the Cloister by Laura E. Weymouth. So the first book that I just finished today is What We Are Seeking by Cameron Reed. This was gifted to me by Tor Books, and it comes out on April 7th. Do I recommend that you pick this book up? Yes, I do. A little bit of background about Cameron Reed. I wouldn't usually do author background, but I think it's kind of important here. Cameron Reed wrote and published a book called The Fortunate Fall that came out in 1996, and it won the, I think, James Tiptree Award. And then she hasn't published anything since. I think she's published 1 or 2 short stories, but she has actually, since publishing that book, The Year of My Birth 30 years ago, come out as trans. And this is her first book in 30 years. This was a really deep and complex book. In my ARC review that I wrote for NetGalley, I wrote, they just don't make them like this anymore, and they really don't. I mean, this is, I think, extremely deliberately harking back to Left Hand of Darkness, but also just a style that we don't write in anymore. We really don't see this style except for authors who've been writing since the 70s and 80s, which fortunately we do still have some of them among us. So the premise of this book, it's a deceptively simple premise, and then there's layers upon layers. We're in a universe where humans have left Earth and colonized other planets. There are still humans left on Earth, and they are bonded to and influenced by, I think, nanotechnology. It's a bit obfuscated, but it seems like it's AI-powered, invisible microbes that bond with certain humans, but it seems like most humans live on planets or on ships, and there is a class divide between people on ships and on planets. We're following main character John, generic white man name, and his fellow ship traveler Sudharma, who is of the Jainish faith. Neither of them are from this ship that they're on. They've both been posted here kind of temporarily, and John is sort of ordered to go down to this planet, Scythia, along with Sudharma. And this is sort of a life sentence. You don't really come back off a planet. So John and Sudharma are sent down to Scythia, and this colony is made up of people from 2 different planets that are quite different, Zandahia and Ishnora. And the Zandahians are Christian, they don't ever call them Christian, but they're studying the Bible, and there is a pastor in their town. And then the Ishnorans are, we learn less about them. We learn about one specific subculture of Ishnoran, which is my favorite part of the book, and I think a part of the book that is so authentic because you know it's being written by a trans author. On Ishnora, and therefore on Scythia, because at least one of them has come to Scythia, are this third gender non-binary identity called a Jess, and then the plural is Jesses. And there's a wonderful character named Irene, who is a Jess. They're the only Jess on the colony, and they're of the generation of the first colonists, so they're like middle-aged to elderly. I think they're like in their 40s or 50s, and I just love the thought and care and complexity that went into this identity. It's very different from like our modern American understanding of a non-binary identity. Irene does use they them pronouns, but being a Jess is a sort of spiritual almost identity that people take on. There's specific clothing that you wear, you braid your hair, it's called like taking up the braid. There are rituals. We actually see in the book a Jess ritual of someone deciding to be Jess and taking on a new name and pronouns. I love that. I would love for us in the future to have like incredible, beautiful, like intimate ceremonies when we come out and take on new names and pronouns. I think that would be just lovely. Something that I didn't pick up on at first is that when you have gender confirmation surgery as a Jess on Ishnora, they don't call it that. They call your gender identity or like gender euphoria your memory. And so you go to a memory clinic because you are making your body match up with your memory of what your body should be like. I love that. I wish that Irene had been the main character, but I also understand the necessity of having John, this outsider, be the main character and our point of view character. And John himself is from this planet called Esius that is matriarchal and non-monogamous, and he's really weirded out by marriage, and a lot of the people on Scythia, being Zandahians and kind of fundamentalist heterosexual religious, are all married, and he's like, monogamy. And I couldn't actually tell from the writing whether Cameron Reed is as repulsed by monogamy as the main character. I don't think it's the kind of book where her opinions would come out that much. I think that she is deliberately kind of having John be in the Genly Eye position from Left Hand of Darkness, where he's in this unfamiliar place and is having his ideas questioned, and certainly he falls in love, and we also get to witness a really beautiful relationship. I won't say who is in the relationship, that I think kind of challenges John's ideas about what a relationship and a romance is, and his people's culture developed for a very specific like planet and time. Even there's a reason that people had to group together and not just have a nuclear family, but I think that he takes it to a level of like being intolerant of other people's ideas of like sex and relationships. And he also he's bisexual, but he definitely has some like subtle misogynistic ideas about like gender and sexuality that do get challenged by characters, mainly by Irene. Like, I think that they are a very good mentor figure to him. They admonish him by calling him young man at one point. God, I want to see more of that. Another cool thing about Scythia, to speak about what actually happens in the book for a minute, is that every animal life, so like insects, mammals, birds, reptiles, start out as a plant. And so there's really specific plants of like, this bush has a twig that branches off 6 times, therefore we know that it's an insect bush. Or there's these terrifying things called snake trees that have snakes living on them, 1 snake per tree, that blend in with the tree and they're connected to the tree, but if you get close enough, they will try and like grab you and strangle you, or if you're close enough to water, hold you down underwater until you drown. They can't bite you, but they can like strangle you to death or try and starve you out. Horrifying. We unfortunately get to see more of those in the book than just them being mentioned, but that's an example of some of the flora und fauna, and a really important kind of like central tension and plot in the book comes from these sentient inhabitants of the planet that they call basket men, that are mammals that can talk, that can walk on all fours or two legs. They carry around a basket full of food with them, and there's lots of discussions about like why are they carrying the basket and like who is the food for and when did they gather it. And Sudharma, who was the translator who came down to the planet with John, is here to translate the basket men's language, if it can even be translated. And so we get into a lot of the like anthropological linguistic nitty-gritty about why they talk the way that they do, or certain like concepts like mentally that they have that have affected their language. I feel like, so as you can probably tell, there are a lot of plot threads going on, and it is kind of told in parts where like roughly the first half of the book is resolving this one thing, and then this other issue comes up in the second half of the book that needs to be dealt with and resolved, and then there's certain plot threads that are stitched in through without, one of them being communicating with the basket men. But there are some things that just like never get resolved. I mean, the end of the book kind of ends not ambiguously, but before we get a resolution to things. So I think that was definitely deliberate. I like to have everything resolved, and I would love for every book to have like a chapter of like, and here's what happened to the characters and the rest of their lives, but I know that's not feasible or even desirable for every book. But this is a very like talky book. It's mostly characters like talking to each other over dinner or on drives in the desert. Like the plot and tension mainly comes from interpersonal conflicts. And I think that's handled really well. Like it is a very slow, understated book. Again, I think we don't see this kind of book much anymore. I could easily envision it as a like Apple TV Plus show, especially because I think that the region that they're living on in Scythia is based on like Arizona and Southern California, so they could easily film it in LA. I rated this book 4 stars. I think that that's partly personal taste, and I wanted to see more things get resolved, and partly in I think that there were some like kind of half-baked thoughts about colonization, and I don't want to spoil why, but I think that that could have been handled better and questioned more. Also, I would have liked to have characters like skin tone stated more. I feel like other than Sudharma, who's implied to be like of Indian descent, no other characters like skin tones are described. I think that's kind of a missed opportunity to talk, in addition to talking about gender and sexuality, the intersections of how race fits in with that. It seems like we're talking a lot more about class and religious dynamics, and a lot of the times authors choose to have this route of, in the future, race isn't really a thing anymore, so there's other conflicts, but usually that's like stated or implied more heavily, and I feel here it was like, I'm kind of picturing everyone as white because everyone seems white to me. I mean, we know that the Ishnurans are, like, they're all described as blonde because several generations previously, a lot of them died, and so there was generational bottlenecking where a lot of the Ishnurans are descended from these very few people. But yeah, I think that was a missed opportunity, and maybe just comes from the author being white. All in all, I do recommend this book, especially if you are a fan of Ursula Le Guin and more anthropological, talky, big ideas sci-fi books. Next, I'm going to start reading Year of the Mer by L.D. Lewis. This is a story about a black girl who is the heir to this kingdom, and her grandmother is the subject of The Little Mermaid. So her grandma was a mermaid who became human, had I think, a daughter, and then her daughter had the main character. I don't know much more about it than that. I have read some early reviews after I got the arc that make me think this book might not be for me, and I read the author's note, and they were like, this is a dark book about a person who's maybe not good. And I'm like, hey, that's fine. I don't know that it's going to be for me, so it might be a DNF review. I'll have to get back to you on that one, but I'm going to give it a fair shot and go into it and see what I think, and then I'll get back to you when I have either finished or DNF'd the book. So last night I started and DNF'd Year of the Myrrh by L.D. Lewis at 17%. I received this arc from Saga Press, so thank you very much to Saga Press for the free arc of this book. Now, did I stay up late reading this? Yes, but I was trying to get to a good stopping point because I wanted to give it a fair shake. And also, I felt like I didn't know what was going on, and I wanted to get to a point where I kind of had a good, either had a good grasp or concluded that I wasn't gonna understand what was going on. It's cold in here. I turned the heat off so it wouldn't come on while I was filming. Now I look like a mob wife. That's all right. I've got a hot female mob spouse. So one of the reasons that it was so hard to tell what was going on in this book is that, like, a lot of terms and words and people are kind of thrown at us, and it's a strange world where, like, we're in a fantasy world, there's mermaids, but there's also, like, cars and cannons, radios, newspapers, so presumably movable type. Their warships are made of metal, but also the main character is a princess. I know there's modern day monarchies, but having royalty just feels so ancient history. Really an American take for you there. But there was just kind of a weird quality where it felt like a lot of things were being left unsaid and we were supposed to intuit what was going on or like what the main character was thinking or implying, but I couldn't possibly because I wasn't familiar with the world or characters yet. And also, the prose is quite overwritten. There were a lot of sentences that had like just like one word added that made it feel like really strange and clunky to read. I don't want to use too many examples because this is an art copy and so the finished product may look different, but there was a part where it said, and the truth of anything was that any words spoken by anyone had the potential to be a lie. First of all, it's a lot of any's in one sentence, and second of all, you could have just left out the of anything and said, and the truth was that any words spoken by anyone had the potential to be a lie. I think that sounds so much better, personally. But there were a lot of sentences like that, or like sentences where it referred to a subject and I didn't know what the subject was, and so it was like, and the soldiers were rumored to love it, and I was like, what is it? What are we talking about? But then the dialogue was a little bit like quippy and almost juvenile in a way where there were references to the Princess Yamaya and her bodyguard Nova having known each other for like 14 years, but I really didn't know how old either of them were. Like, this is an adult book, and so I was thinking probably mid-20s, but I'm really not sure. As I mentioned before, this is in a world where Ariel, as she's called, was the Little Mermaid, and she fell in love with a human prince, and unlike in the Hans Christian Andersen version, she did get to have her happily ever after, marry her prince, and go on to have a daughter who then herself had a daughter, and that daughter is Yamaya. And then her mother, the queen, is still ruling the country. And as a result of the original Ariel marrying this prince, their neighboring country, Caspia, declared war on them, which I think, and this is me trying to understand what the book was saying, I think that someone in Caspia had been promised to the prince who married Ariel instead, and because they didn't get to have that political alliance, Caspia didn't get brought into the religion of Ixia, which they wanted, and Ixia worships these like old gods. Maybe I'll get to that in a second. But I was just wondering, why did they need a political marriage to do that? Why couldn't Caspia just start worshipping the old gods and get brought into their religion that way? But I'm also not sure that that's why they went to war. It was unclear. And then there was a second war that Ixia had to fight that was a civil war because there was a mermaid on the throne. But the weird thing, and this doesn't get revealed until like 2 chapters in, and it actually contradicts some like religious lore that we're told in the prologue, is that Mer are considered gods. So Ariel was a god on the throne, and her descendants, the queen and then Yamaya, the princess, are gods. So I don't know why there was a civil war about having a god on the throne. Like, because this country is religious and their religious practices are really entwined with the government, it seems like that would be a good thing. So I don't know why there was a civil war about it. And then Yamaya's character, I think, is very contradictory because she does mention, like, someone kind of randomly brings up, like, would you consider dissolving the monarchy when you become queen? And she said, well, you know, I've been told that I'm a god and I'm expected to take the throne, and so to suddenly think that I'm not a god and to not be on the throne would be really weird, which is like a bad excuse to not dissolve the monarchy, to preserve like one person's feelings about themselves, but there's a lot of bad reasons that monarchy is in place. Am I right, Americans? But then she's also like completely uninterested in all of her duties as the princess. She's also like, it's implied she's a naval commander. No, I think she's like literally a naval commander. Like they call her commander, and when the book opens, she is commanding a small fleet of ships. But she's doesn't have a lot of military experience. Like when I DNF'd, there was a scene between her and Nova, her bodyguard, spear training, and it does reference earlier in the book that she's been trained with the spear, but that seemed to be it. And also like several times Nova is referenced as like having to be her bodyguard and Yamaya needing a bodyguard, which like of course makes sense. Like even like historical monarchs who had like been to war probably still had bodyguards, but there's also like never a sentence saying like, you know, I'm here for your protection. Also, I know that you can defend yourself because you have XYZ training. But that was just never stated because I don't think she has any like command experience. It would also make more sense if we knew how old she was. That would give me a better idea of like what experience she has leading this fleet, but we don't. Or we didn't at the 17% mark. And like I don't think that Yamaya is supposed to be a good character. Like that's stated in the author's note at the beginning, and it's one of the reasons that I thought I might DNF this. That's not a bad thing, it's just not to my personal taste. I like reading about goody goodies. And I think that it could be really, really interesting to have a person who thinks they're a god and has like a little divine right to the throne, abusing that power as Yamaya does in one scene that we see. But the rest of the time she's just like totally uninterested in it. Like she reluctantly goes to see her mom having a state dinner and like doesn't really want to interact with her mom that much. Like one of the reasons is that they have a strained relationship, but the other reason is that she's just not interested in learning how to rule. And God, the only reason that I want to read about royalty these days is if they're like doing their jobs, because I find like politics and running a country super duper interesting. It's one of the reasons that The Goblin Emperor is one of my favorite books. And main character Maya in that book, Wicked doesn't want to be the emperor, but the whole book is about him being the emperor and trying to do a good job of it. And I think that someone trying to do a job well is super interesting, and Yamaya being a reluctant princess is a trope that I was tired of like literally when I was 12. I remember complaining about it to my friend. I just wanted to see them like rule things. So DNFing that one, I think it was a combination of the writing style and the book just not being for me. If you're interested in more like morally gray characters, then this definitely might be the book for you. It's just not for me. And honestly, like if I'd known that, I might not have requested it. But the tough thing with requesting arcs is that you can't really read a preview before you request them, or at least I don't think you can. I'll have to look into that. So that was Year of the Mer, and I will be back momentarily for you with my review of The Castle and the Cloister. I'm wearing my Mob Wife cardigan again. It's several weeks later, but I just like this cardigan. The final book that I read for this video is The Castle and the Cloister by Laura E. Weymouth. This book comes out in August, on August 4th. This arc was gifted to me by the publisher Saga Press, so thank you very much to Saga Press for giving me this arc through NetGalley. As I was reading this book, I had trouble figuring out how to talk about it, but when I got to the end, I think I know like what the shape of it is and what the author was trying to do. This is a adult political fantasy set in the kingdom of Orania, or Honoria, or Honoria. Not really sure what the author's preferred pronunciation is. And for the past 200 years, it's been ruled by this dynasty called the Inver dynasty. They are bloodthirsty, they value war and conquest, and if the king doesn't kill his dad to ascend the throne, then is he really king? When the dynasty came into power, they tried to wipe out the previous religion, which worshipped these three goddesses, a goddess of the moon, the sun, and the stars. But the cloisters are still on the continent, and in fact, the cloister of the sun is extremely important politically. And that's where our main character, Fia, comes in. There are other close third point of view characters, but Fia is the certainly the driving heart of the story. So Fia arrived at this convent 6 months ago, literally barefoot and pregnant, to ask for a place as a Soria. That's kind of the word for nun here. And she's since given birth to her daughter, but she's not quite sworn in as a Soria yet. And the mother abbess asks her to take a message to the queen and tells her that she needs to kind of broaden her view a little bit because she really only cares about herself and her infant daughter. So then we get to the capital in Berlin, where we meet the rest of our cast and the rest of our point of view characters. And the big players here are Ariana, the queen, her husband Orden, the king, and then the king's half-brother, the head priest of the new religion, who just goes by the priest. We learn his name, but he doesn't usually go by it, he just goes by his title. All of these people are super complicated, and although I don't usually like morally gray characters because I feel like they're usually just evil but hot, these characters truly are morally gray in that they think and do both good and bad things for their own internal logic and justification. And even Orden the king, although he sucks, like, we do get some sections from his point of view, and I felt a little bit bad for him, and like I really sympathized with him in some points, and it just goes to show you, I think, that like if you're in someone's head, it can be really easy to sympathize them because you're seeing the self-justifications that they make for horrific actions. So I think that that was super interesting. And also, the priest is blind. He lost his sight in one of the many wars that Honoria is undertaking. And I thought that the sections from his point of view were super interesting because I didn't like forget that he was blind, but I was picturing his sections the same way I was picturing the other characters' sections, because it's not like the author is constantly talking about how he can't see. She just uses other senses to describe what's happening in his chapters, and he's gotten good at telling when a certain number of people have come into a room, and is good at identifying people by their voices. Although it's only February, I think Fia as a character is going to be an absolute standout character for me this year. I mean, she goes through so much character development in the book, but she stays true to her values at the beginning of the book, while still like expanding those values outward to encompass other people, if that makes sense. And she ends up being one of the most like ambitious and self-driven characters that I've ever read. And also, she's a girl's girl. She loves other women, lifts up and supports them, especially Ariana the Queen. Now, Fia and Ariana know each other from before their own lives as a would-be Soria and the Queen, and Ariana's an extremely complicated character for reasons that I don't want to spoil, but Ariana has this past and she thinks that she can kind of change the kingdom and change her husband, Orden, from within, has been arguably successfully doing a lot of that, trying to broker peace and temper her husband. She makes some really bad decisions and I just wanted to like grab her and shake her sometimes, but it was also like she'd been through a lot and she was just seeking out safety, but sometimes that was to like the detriment of lots of people around her. While I was reading this, I was reminded a few times of the Raven Scholar, not necessarily because of the themes, but just because of the twists and turns, and also the Curse of Chalion. And in all three books, the gods and religion are very important, and the gods themselves are real because they have a direct influence on the world. And the author says in her author's note that she was inspired by Roman Catholicism and kind of the era of the Renaissance in the Mediterranean, and the church having so much political power as it does here. I mean, the church and the leaders of the church are really major players in the story and within the world. I will say that because of this, there was a moment that felt like a little bit Deus Ex Machina towards the end, and you could say, Julia, the Curse of Chalion is nothing but Deus Ex Machinas, and I'm like, yeah, but in that book, it's happening constantly, and so it's like one of the kind of central things of the book where there's all of these like coincidences that are like piling up that are part of the twists and turns, and in this book it was like one really big like convenient Deus Ex Machina that I thought was kind of like, oh, well, really? I don't know if you can hear it, but it is raining really hard. I'm gonna rate this 4 stars, and that was kind of the rating that I had in mind as I got to like the first third, middle of the book, and that stuck through, although, and this is really important, this is not a standalone. And naturally, that is not advertised on NetGalley, on the Storygraph. When they announced this book on like Reactor Magazine Tor's publishing website, which is where I first heard about this book, it doesn't say anywhere like beginning of a trilogy, beginning of a series, beginning of a duology. So as I was getting to like the 50-60% mark, I was like, wow, it's really cool how she's gonna wrap all these things up in one book. She wicked doesn't. There's lots of things left unresolved, and so that kept my rating from being higher, and I think is like the 4-star with a little asterisk on it. Also, the world ended up feeling kind of small in the way sometimes where this is not the first time I've seen this in a book, where the author was like, this person's related to this person, did you know? And also that person's related to that person, and it just makes the world feel like the cast of characters is very tight, where it doesn't need to be, because it's like an expansive world and continent that she's built out, and yet somehow all the important people are related to each other. I'll also kind of point out, this is a pretty diverse world. None of the main characters are people of color as far as I could tell. They were all white, but there are some other major characters that are described as being dark-skinned, and this is also like not a world with a lot of queer people in it, it seemed like. Really the only reference to queer people was Fia saying, well, I don't have a husband or wife to keep me in line, and I'm honestly not sure why that line was there if there weren't going to be any other queer people in the book. Just got my hopes up for it being a queer norm world, and it didn't seem like it was. Those are my thoughts on The Castle and the Cloister. Thanks again to Saga Press for the arc, and although I'm mad that it's a series, I wanted it to be a standalone. I will be continuing this series, although the book isn't coming out for 6 months, so I think I'm gonna have to wait a while for the next one. That is also the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back next week with something. Oh, my Black History Month vlog, so I will see you then. And please remember to like and subscribe and all that. Okay, bye.